Hi, everybody. Let's talk about the digestive system. When I first learned about this system, it was my very favorite because it just seemed to make sense. Also, if you think about it, this is the system that we really control a lot because we control what goes into it, and we definitely have to deal with what comes out of it. And so it is, unlike the endocrine system or the respiratory system that just happen automatically, we definitely have a lot more control over, at least we think we have control over the digestive system. It is, when I was younger and I was learning about it, it seemed very easy because it was just a sequence of events, and it's from start to finish, done. And it is still, now that I've learned more about it, it is a series of events happening in a very specific order. And it gets a little more complicated than that. We're going to talk about it. And by the end of it, hopefully you will also have a lovely understanding of it. You do not have to make it your favorite system, but I definitely enjoyed learning about it when I first learned about it. Okay, anyways, stop babbling, start talking. The digestive system has one big function. Its function is to take in materials that the body can use. So it does this by digesting. Okay, so digestion actually includes ingestion, absorption, and excretion. So ingestion is when you take food into the mouth. And then digestion, did I skip one? Ingestion, absorption, you have to digest it first. Okay, so we'll get into it. Anyway, the point of it is to take in those four basic subunits. Okay, so the nucleic acids, the amino acids, the lipids, and the carbohydrates that we talked about so early in the semester, which seems so long ago, but it was only a few weeks. You guys, time is weird now. Okay, so the point of this is so that we can get those monomers to every cell in the body. They have to come from digestion first. Okay, so that's kind of bananas. It's bananas, something you might ingest and then distribute to your whole body. And these, the point of this is because we need those monomers either to build new stuff or we need to break them down so that we can use their energy. Okay, so either way, digestion is incredibly important. This is what separates us from the plants because animals must do digestion. And there are some plants that do chemical digestion, if you think about a Venus flytrap or a sundew, but they're very rare and in between. And there are cases where plants are acting like animals. There are no animals that act like plants in that we can't just go and photosynthesize instead of eating, unfortunately. Oh, life would be so much easier. But we wouldn't, anyway, I'm not going to get into it. Okay, so let's talk about it. So if you kind of think about the digestive system from the point of view of, say, a plant or a bacteria, we as humans are if you just think about humans as a general, organism, we are very complicated cells that have an in and an out. Okay, we have other places where there are holes in our membrane that is our skin. Okay, for example, our eyes. This is a female, so there's a vagina, a vaginal cavity here, and then this is. This is the vagina, and this is where the urine comes out. This is a urinary canal. But you'll notice none of the rest of these are connected to anything except for the digestive system, okay? You should notice right here, there's something interesting happening in that the nose shares some space. That nasal cavity shares some space with the digestive system. Oh no! Same thing here. These are supposed to be lungs. There is something weird going on here we're going to talk about, but the digestive system, or the alimentary canal, as it's officially referred to, starts in the mouth, goes through some stuff, and then ends in the anal sphincter opening and releasing waste. And that's it. Done. We learned it all. Just kidding. It's more complicated because each one of these areas is going to have what's called a sphincter to separate it from the area before or after it. And it's going to have these accessory organs that are adding stuff to it to help in digestion. Okay, so let's get a little more fancy. Let's talk about it more scientifically, or in a different kind of science. So here is the entrance to digestion. If you have, say, Crohn's disease or something, you have an extra hole is made in different parts of your digestive tract, depending on where the disease parts are, so that you can add digestive juices in different ways. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so the alimentary canal, or the gastrointestinal tract, again, starts in the mouth. You'll notice that there, let's see, what do I want you to notice about this? Oh yeah, so there's two big kinds of digestion. There's mechanical digestion, which is physical digestion. That's where your teeth rip things apart. The walls of your stomach grind against each other, and that rips stuff apart in that way. And then there's chemical digestion, or things being digested chemically, which is where some sort of an enzyme comes out and allows things to digest in a different way instead of just ripping things up and digesting them. then eventually wastes are just gotten rid of out the body, because why keep those around? Get them out. Every part of the alimentary canal, because if you go back here, you kind of notice that really we're like a donut. This is a continuous tube from start to finish, and that these two they don't actually interact except for through this absorption, or when we dump stuff into the digestive tract to get rid of it. Otherwise, there's no other interaction between the digestive system and the rest of the body, and so we have to be very careful what we allow into the digestive system, or in from the digestive system. We don't want to allow weird things. The way toxins work is they mimic things that we normally see as food. And so, for example, arsenic mimics a chemical needed in DNA and can be absorbed because our body's like, hey, that's that thing we need for DNA. And then it gets in there and obstructs everything, and that's a disaster. Other things, though, a lot of times there are things we can't digest and we just get rid of them. The big example being corn kernels. We can't digest corn kernels. We can, when we mechanically digest it, we can get some of what's inside of a corn kernel, and we can digest that. But the rest of it's just it is excreted whole, and that's it. And we can't use it. We can't digest it. Something else has to, because we don't. And so if you think about this as a tube, again, from the beginning to the end, there are some accessory organs that are going to be adding things to that tube. And so we're going to talk about the salivary glands, the pancreas, and then the liver and the gallbladder, which work together. Okay, so here's the liver, here's the gallbladder, here's the pancreas, and then here's the salivary glands. Let's do it. Oh yeah, before we get into that, let's talk about that alimentary canal. The entire thing from mouth to anus has two major layers that we're going to worry about. The first being the mucosal layer. So the mucosal layer is always facing the inside of the canal. Okay, so obviously that makes sense. So the inside, basically every part of your alimentary canal is lined in mucus. Different parts have different amounts of mucus. So the esophagus, let's say you're eating tortilla chips and you don't chew them very well before you swallow because you're excited, whatever, you definitely feel it going down, but it still can go down. And that's because the esophagus has a whole lot of mucus lining it to kind of lubricate it so stuff can go through the system. On the other hand, the rectum doesn't have a lot of mucus because everything by the time it gets to the rectum is just ready to be gotten rid of. It's been digested as much as possible, so there's no sharp edges anymore. Okay, so it doesn't need as much lubrication. I want to say anything else about that? Oh, yes. So the point of mucus, by the way, remember one of the points of mucus is that it is this epithelial layer that secretes, that uses goblet cells to make mucus to protect us from a lot of germs. So that's why, for example, the coronavirus can't be passed through digestive tracts. Okay, because at least as far as we know. Because our salivary glands, our saliva, and the mucus that it lines everything actually kills viruses. Okay, now there are definitely some exceptions, but in general, the mucus linings, it's hard to get most diseases through your digestive system because our digestive system just breaks it all down. That's why it's also interesting to think about different kinds of diets, like alkaline diets, as being, they're not really going to change the alkalinity of your blood because by the time it gets to your stomach, there's so much acid, it doesn't change anything. Like, it just gets broken down before any kind of absorption happens. Okay, so again, the mucus is not allowing things, mucus can also determine what goes through that layer and gets absorbed. And so, yeah, we won't get into fad diets and how they're sometimes ridiculous, but that's a big part of it. Okay, so we'll get underneath that mucus layer, we have these muscle layers, okay? And so these are smooth muscle layers for the most part, because we don't want to sit here and think, okay, stomach ready, digest. These smooth muscles are the ones that are controlled by the involuntary parts of our brain. They're those involuntary muscles, which is, we already have enough to worry about. We don't need to also worry about controlling digestion. And there's two big ways that this happens. One is there's waves of muscle contractions that go like from our esophagus down, and it's like squeezing stuff through a toothpaste to get it into a certain, like to move the toothpaste to the end that you want. Okay, and that's called peristalsis. That's a wave. You guys can't see my hands, but they're doing like squeezing some toothpaste, and that's called peristalsis, to move stuff in a certain direction. And peristalsis is so strong that you can actually, once food is in the esophagus, you can turn upside down and the food is still going to move in the correct direction. Even though gravity wants it to move a certain way, peristalsis is still squeezing that food like toothpaste, or not, by now it's called a bolus because it's, started to digest. It's squeezing it towards the stomach. Now, before the esophagus, though, we'll talk about how that can be really dangerous. We'll talk about it in a moment. There's also something called segmentation, I believe is what it's called. You'll see it in the notes for the in the book, and that's where it's like when your stomach is digesting, it's like kind of a washing machine just sloshing around. It's just getting stuff to mix in one area, not move in a certain place. But most of the digestive system works through peristalsis. Okay, so here we go. We used to have everyone memorize the order, but now you can just look it up. So it's a better idea is to actually memorize what is happening in each part. So what's the point of each part? Okay, so and you'll actually end up memorizing this by accident because, again, these are things that definitely, as soon as you start to feel kind of gross after you ate something, your immediate thought is, oh no, what's happening next? Am I going to poop myself? Am I going to throw up? What's happening? So we're very conscious of our digestive system, like, all the time. And so the more you know about what different parts of it feel like, the more you can kind of, the more you learn about what you're eating and what your behavior is going to be, etc. Okay, so let's talk. So a lot of people, when they say, my tummy hurts, it could actually be their small intestine is hurting, their large intestine is uncomfortable, whatever. But let's talk about all the different parts. Okay, so we're going to start in the mouth. So, no, we're not. We're going to start with when these distinct parts are kept distinct because in between each one, for the most part, is a sphincter. And a sphincter is a circle of, that is a circle of muscles that contracts, okay? Or it contracts or dilates. So it's like how your iris is a circle of muscles, or has a circle of muscles controlling it, the iris in your eye, so that your pupil can get bigger or smaller. Okay, so in the, it's like closing a cap on something. Okay, it squeezes that closed. Okay, it's again like toothpaste, a toothpaste screw top. Okay, that is kind of what a sphincter does. It just screws everything closed so nothing can get through it. Okay, so for example, you'll notice that all of these kinds of sphincters, are all muscles, but the very first one, the orbicularis oris, which is the one that makes our lips pucker, okay, so we can whistle or drink through a straw. And the very last one, the external anal sphincter, are skeletal muscles, which means we control those. So we actually have to learn when we control our external anal muscle. External anal sphincter muscle. So again, when do you poop? When do you excrete your waste? You have to control that. So there are times when you can't, when your body's like, you are not listening to me, we're going now. And that could be when you're really scared. It could be when your body thinks you've eaten something that's going to kill you, and so you have to get rid of it immediately. And we're going to talk about how the anal sphincter is your best friend because it tells you if solid, liquid, or gas is trying to get through it, and then you can make a conscious decision. Am I going to release the sphincter or not? Or am I going to allow the sphincter to open or not? So that's why we do potty training in kids, is they have to learn when is it okay for me to allow the sphincter to open. Okay, and let's talk about in the mouth. Again, your lips our lips are very complicated. The way they move is very complicated. Same thing with the tongue because of language. Okay, if we were like other animals where all we had a tongue for was eating, it wouldn't be our tongue wouldn't be as complicated. And neither would our lips, okay, if we didn't have language. Because the whole point of the tongue originally, it's just a big old muscle, and it moves food around as you're chewing to get to different sides of your teeth, different teeth that are going to do different things of them, and then it pushes it to the back of the throat so that you can swallow it. Okay, well, it turns out we can also use it when we push air through our mouth to, if our tongue is in a certain place, we can make a certain noise, and you put those noises together in certain ways, and you get language. Fascinating. Okay, but language, not a part of digestion. But that is a big part of why we should wear a mask right now, because we can't control how much saliva is leaving our mouth when we're speaking. It can be really hard. And so no matter how hot and dry the day is, anytime you open your mouth, water is leaving it. And so that water, if it's coming, if those air particles and those water particles are mixing with the air particles that are coming from your lungs, it could be full of virus. And so one of the big reasons why the importance of wearing a mask is that you could, even if you have no symptoms, you could be shoving a whole bunch of virus molecules into the air all the time, and somebody who is sensitive could pick them up. Okay, moving on. Let's keep going with digestion. Teeth. What's up with teeth? Teeth. Not only do we use our teeth to allow our tongue to rest on different places, so we make different noises. Like if you think about how to say the L sound versus the, oh, what's a good L? L's and R's. It all depends on where you put your tongue. And it's all about where you put your tongue, right? And so, not only are our teeth about where we put our tongue to allow for different noises to come out, our teeth are actually the very first part of digestion, which is that mechanical digestion of ripping, tearing, and grinding stuff. So if you're eating a sandwich, you rip a piece of sandwich off, and then your tongue helps you move that piece of sandwich around to the right teeth to keep masticating or to keep digesting it mechanically. Okay, so you rip first with your, we don't really do a lot with our canines. Those are kind of the vampire fangs, right? So we don't do a lot with those. It's more we rip pieces off with our incisors. It's interesting because if you think about dogs and cats, their canines are what they use to bite things, and then they can rip through, that'll just like the sheer force of their jaw moving allows them to rip things. But the more incisors in dogs and cats are often just for biting fleas or whatever. Like whenever they have an itch, they use those little teeth to bite those kinds of things. Well, we don't do that. We use our incisors to rip through sandwiches. Hopefully you're not biting, fleas with your mouth. Okay. Okay, so the general word for anytime you're chewing, that is mastication. Okay, so the different kinds of teeth have different structures. Our molars are big and flat. That allows us to grind things up and try to pull out some more nutrients before we start swallowing. The more surface area or the more like ground up something is, the better we can get stuff out of it. And we're going to go into that a lot. So let's say you've done a bunch of masticating, your tongue is ready, and your tongue has determined that it is time to swallow. One thing that you can kind of start to confuse yourself on is if you think about, how do I know when it's time to swallow? Your tongue is so sensitive that and your cheeks also, it tells you when it's time to swallow. Okay, so this idea of you must chew your food 30 times before you swallow. Why? You don't have to. That's like a weird rule. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe you need more, maybe you need less. There's no set number of times you should chew your food. It's all about your jaw strength and your tooth surface, and your tongue will tell you when it's time to swallow, okay? And when you do swallow, the uvula, the thing that hangs at the back, is this little flap here. It will flap up and will protect your nasal passages so food doesn't want to go through your nose, okay? So it allows food and water to only go down into the esophagus and not up into the nose. So if you are, if you've ever seen somebody squirt, they're laughing, they're drinking milk and then they laugh, what happens is their uvula is protecting the nasal cavity, but then they laugh, and in order to laugh, you have to take in a deep breath and then laugh. Well, they suddenly take in a deep breath and the uvula flaps down, but there's still milk in that area, so the milk goes up and out the nose instead. Not pleasant, not pleasant. And the problem then is you can also, it opens up part of your trachea, so if you try and swallow to get rid of that milk that's trying to come out your nose, it could go into your air pipes instead. Problematic. Okay, so what else is happening in the mouth? In the mouth, we also have saliva. So saliva comes from salivary glands. And I'm not too concerned with you knowing the exact names of them, just know where they are. So the weird or yellow, lumpy things, okay? So there's one under our tongue. If you've ever, quote, gleeked, like, moved your tongue in a certain way and then saliva just shoots out of your mouth, it's coming from this sublingual gland. Oh, I guess this is the sublingual gland. I don't know what they're trying to say this is, but it's coming from this. So this is our tongue, and it's coming directly from a duct here, because these are exocrine glands, which means they release their substance directly where it's going to act. Okay, so it comes out of its gland directly where it's acting, which is on whatever is in the mouth. Okay, and so it's important for several reasons. We need some water in there so it tastes better. So not that it just literally tastes better, but so that we can taste better. So what that means is that if you have some water in your mouth, a little bit of water, it will move whatever food is in your mouth around to all over parts of your tongue, and then you can taste, you get a better sense of what you're eating. You actually literally, it's applying to more taste glands, and you can taste better what you're eating. Okay. The saliva also has a mucosal component, because again, that is making sure that whatever's coming into your body, you're protected against any bacteria or viruses or anything else like protozoans bugs or whatever that are trying to get in there. And, we're big, tasty beings. The microscopic stuff wants to live in us. We're so juicy and fantastic. And so our body's like, no, you don't get to live here. Back off. And that's one of the places it happens, is the mucus that's coming in our saliva, acting on anything else that's trying to live in your food and in your body. There was something else I was going to talk about. Oh yeah. So there is another part of mucus being, and in saliva in general, if you've ever cut your hand, your automatic response is your reflex is to put it in your mouth. And there's a reason for that. It's not because we're nasty. It's because there are chemicals in our spit or our saliva that actually act to increase clotting and to decrease inflammation. So before we figured out how this stuff worked, we just figured out evolutionarily that if I cut myself and I put it in my mouth, or if you see animals, they lick their wounds. The reason why they lick their wounds is to help encourage clotting and to decrease inflammation, because those chemicals are in the saliva. So it's like a very rudimentary Neosporin that just comes right out of your mouth. Obviously, you should use Neosporin instead, because you also could have chemicals and bacteria living in your mouth that are not going to do well if you go and lick somebody. But it's an interesting, it's a good thing, if you're trapped in the woods and you cut your hand and you don't have Neosporin nearby, you could, put your hand in your mouth if it's like a little cut and survive. Okay, so just don't get trapped in the woods. It's my real suggestion. The big thing we care about in the mucus, so another thing mucus does is it helps lubricate whatever we're eating. Okay, so by the time we chew things up, food is now called a bolus, B-O-L-U-S. So that's fun, because we just want to name it all sorts of things, and that just means we're starting to digest whatever bite we've taken. And that bolus, as it's being exposed to saliva, is being exposed to the enzyme salivary amylase. So salivary means it comes from the salivary glands, or the saliva glands, and amylase means it is an enzyme that breaks down fats. Or no, not fats. Hello. It breaks down carbohydrates. It breaks down carbohydrates. And so it's breaking down long-chain carbohydrates, like starches, into short-chain carbohydrates, like the sugars that we taste as being sweet. Okay, so this is, for example, if you, in your lab, actually asks you to take an unsalted cracker, put it in your mouth, and just wait. And you'll notice that as the spit is starting to build up, the cracker starts to taste sweeter, because the longer chains that make like savory flavors are being broken down into the flavors that we taste as sweet. Interesting. Okay, so this is the first example of chemical digestion. And what a good test question. Where does the first example of chemical digestion happen in the digestive system? It's happening in the mouth because of salivary amylase. Another interesting example, like another way you can kind of think about this, if you ever have unripe bananas, so when they're unripe, they have these really long chains of starches in them that aren't great. They don't taste good to us. We don't like them. But as those starches start to break down and the banana ripens, they become sweeter, because those long starches are getting broken down into shorter and shorter things that we taste as being sweet. Technically, you could do that in your mouth, but that's weird. You'd have to put an unripe banana in your mouth, and that's gross. I don't recommend it. Okay, so what's the next thing? So we've swallowed our bolus, okay? So our bolus has left the mouth, so this whole area is the tongue, and actually goes back a bit more. So the pharynx is the part right after the mouth, and it's this shared space between the respiratory system, so your breathing system, and the digestive system. And this is very dangerous and horrible in humans, because the problem is we are one of the only animals where we cannot do both at the same time, because there's this shared space. And it's all because the vocal cord sits right here and causes this shared space. And other animals, their vocal cords are not as complicated, and so they don't need as much space for the trachea. Oh, it's very annoying. And so, and in fact, in babies, you may notice that babies can drink bottles and breathe at the same time. Adults cannot. And it's because at some point our vocal cords drop and move into an area that opens up this pharynx, so that all of a sudden we have to really control, am I breathing or am I swallowing? Like, what am I doing right now? Okay, so part of swallowing is to tell us to instinctually stop breathing. Okay, there may be cases of SIDS, or sudden infant death syndrome, where a baby is, their vocal cords drop too soon, and instead of being, just being a happy baby, drinking a bottle and breathing, all of a sudden they're trying to breathe and swallow at the same time, and they can't, and they end up choking, and it's horrible. So this is an example of bad evolutionary design in humans. Great job, evolution. But we have to learn not to breathe and swallow at the same time. Okay, next, pharynx. Okay, swallowing. Swallowing is a reflex, which is all about when our tongue so this giant thing is our tongue, and it pushes the bolus or that food ball back, and as it does, it causes that epiglottis, which is this flap, to try and help make sure the food goes into the esophagus, okay, which is here, and not the trachea, which is here, which is where breathing happens. Okay, so it hopefully, and it's kind of like a trap door. It's kind of like the uvula pops up, and the epiglottis pops down so that food goes in the right tube. So whenever food goes down the wrong tube or down the wrong hole or down the wrong way, it's because it's getting trapped under the epiglottis and trying to go into the trachea. It's getting trapped on the vocal cords, which is why a lot of times if you do like accidentally swallow food the wrong way, it hurts to talk because you've literally kind of scratched up your vocal cords for a little bit, which is the worst. Okay. Da-da-da-da. Good. Okay. So, the larynx. The larynx is, I don't really care. Okay, keep moving. All right. So what I've mentioned esophagus. So what is the esophagus? The esophagus is this tube that takes food from where you've swallowed it and just squeezes it down to the stomach. Okay. And it's kind of a weird idea that it has to travel so far. It doesn't do anything in the esophagus. It's literally a 10-inch tube that goes from where the danger zone is of where you could choke on your food to where finally it will start to get digested more in the stomach. Why? Because there's no digestive stuff here. That's where our lungs and heart are. All right, cool. So we'll just move digestion down a bit and it's fine. It doesn't not work. So evolution is all about it. Okay. And this is where peristalsis happens, where you squish you contract some muscles here and it squishes down, and then you contract the next set of muscles and it squishes down and it squishes down, okay, until it gets to the stomach, okay? Fabulous. But before it hits the stomach, it hits the esophageal hiatus. That's where it waits. It's just the area where it has to hit there's actually a hole in the diaphragm, this muscle here. And remember, that's what helps us breathe. When it contracts, the lungs get pulled down, which causes us to take in air. Okay. So there's a hole in the diaphragm so that the esophagus can go through it. Okay. So that's interesting. And the esophageal hiatus is where food waits to be allowed in through the sphincter. Okay. So there is something called a hiatal hernia, which is where you get a tear in your diaphragm, which causes irritation and heartburn. Okay. So sometimes what's happening is the stomach is kind of squishing up past the diaphragm and then it kind of protrudes a little bit. And if the stomach is pushing up, it's making acid here. It's no good. If you just get like a little bit of heartburn sometimes, what's happening is the sphincter that's up here, the lower esophageal or the cardiac sphincter, opens up a little early as you're eating, and a little bit of the stomach acid gets pushed up into the esophagus. It kind of like burps out a little bit, just kind of squishes out. And then because of that, the esophagus is not designed to handle acid like the stomach is. It's so sensitive to the crazy acid going on in the stomach. So it burns this part of your esophagus. And same thing if you know people who are bulimic, or if you are bulimic, the same thing is happening. This really acidic solution that's in the stomach is going up through the esophagus and eventually going up to your teeth and just burning everything the entire way through. So a lot of times the first person who knows if someone is bulimic or throwing up for mental health or mental disease reasons is your dentist, because they see that your back teeth are starting to be eroded by acid. Interesting. Okay, so once we get to the stomach, we have more chemical and mechanical digestion, okay? Because our stomach is actually a whole bunch of muscles called ruga or fundi, and they just are constantly squishing in place, doing that segmentation digestion where they're squishing and squishing like a weird washing machine that's moving everything around. And the reason why they do it is they're moving all parts of that bolus so that they get in contact with acid, okay? So our stomachs, and along with your list of like the order of things, I would also make a list of like the things that come from what place, so the secretions from what organ. So the stomach secretes hydrochloric acid, which breaks down proteins. So in the mouth, we saw that carbohydrates start to break down. In the stomach, it's all about those proteins breaking down. Okay. So it also is a nice place to inactivate microbes. So if you're taking like a pill of probiotics, well, it probably won't work because it'll probably get broken down in the stomach. Okay, so it's better to, if you're eating something like yogurt, it is an environment that is helpful to your probiotics. And so by eating that, you're actually just feeding the good stuff in your guts that rather than eating a pill of deactivated bacteria, well, that's not going to help you do anything. So hydrochloric acid denatures proteins, so does pepsin. That might sound familiar. The word Pepsi comes from this because Pepsi Cola was originally, it was made out of pepsin, this digestive enzyme, because it helps settle stomachs who weren't making enough pepsin. Interesting. Okay. The stomach also secretes a whole lot of mucus to help move things around. Okay. And it also protects your own stomach from digesting itself. And if it doesn't, then you get an ulcer. And we're going to see a picture of an ulcer. It's super gross. Okay. There is a hormone that makes the HCl or the hydrochloric acid and the pepsin start to be produced, and that's if your mouth starts to water because you smell food and you're hungry. It is as you start to water, your mouth starts to water, gastrin is released to your stomach to say, hey, get ready, start producing hydrochloric acid because some food is coming. Okay, so then your stomach starts to secrete acids. If your stomach is growling, what is happening is those folds are all starting to like rub against each other, and that's the noise you're hearing. And as I said that, my stomach growled. All right. Then you do see a little bit of absorption of water and B and C vitamins and some electrolytes or salts, and alcohol, but it's not very much. Most of the absorption is going to happen in the next thing. So you'll notice all we've digested so far, it's a little bit of starch in your mouth, and your proteins are being digested in the stomach. So what about fats and what about nucleic acids? Well, we don't really worry about nucleic acids, but our fats don't get digested until they start going into the small intestine. So here's a peptic ulcer. Very gross. So what happens with peptic ulcers is when your stomach, the mucus in your stomach starts to kind of wear away, and the bacteria in your stomach go a little crazy. And what happens is so the mucus starts to wear down and usually it's because of stress, okay, or it's things that are happening that are due to stress. Okay, so this is interesting. So this is very much a medical side, is why medically do we get ulcers? Because bacteria starts to break down your stomach mucus, and then acid gets in there and just starts eating through it. Okay, or if you take too much ibuprofen or aspirin, that could also affect this. But what's actually happening is the bacterium is allowed to grow, because if you're too stressed out, so definitely if you're producing too much corticosteroid hormone, that will, or cortisol, it will start to affect the pH of your stomach in a weird way. So this Helicobacter pylori starts to take over, and the good bacteria that's normally happy in your stomach can't fight it anymore, and then the H. pylori will start to eat through your stomach, and then you get these ulcers. Okay, the NSAIDs, or whatever you pronounce this, these could act, if it's anti-inflammatory, it could actually downregulate corticosteroids, so also again affect your stress response. And again, if your stress response is affected, then you're going to have a weird environment in your stomach that's going to allow bacteria to take over. Oh no, they are very, very painful. I do not recommend getting one. Okay, so we were talking about what happens after the stomach. Okay, so we've got a bunch of proteins that are digested, we have some starches digested, but we still have a bunch of stuff that isn't digested, and we haven't absorbed anything really yet. So let's go into the small intestine. What? And the small intestine is very, very long. It is, it has 3 parts to it. Okay, it has the first part, the duodenum, is 12 inches, about a foot long, and then we have 8 feet of the jejunum in the middle, and then we have another foot of the ileum at the very end. And the reason why it's 3 different parts is because there's 3 different areas of stuff happening, okay? But you'll see this is a 10-foot long thing, all, again, just kind of curled up inside your body. Okay, and the whole point of the small intestine is bile from the liver, our second accessory organ happening, comes in. So we'll talk about it, but bile is made in the liver and stored in the gallbladder until you need it. Okay, and that, and then we also have enzymes coming from the pancreas, and then some happening from the intestine, all come down into the duodenum and are ready to take whatever the stomach has done, and also there's also some electrolytes to help denature the acid coming from your stomach, and all of a sudden just like starts digesting everything else like crazy. So bile it digests fats, and then the other enzymes coming from the pancreas are going to digest the rest of your starches, your starches and your sugars. Okay, so all of your carbohydrates. Okay, Okay, we also start to see absorption happen in this part of the alimentary canal. So especially in the jejunum, that 8-foot long segment, the longer a digestive system is in an animal, the more absorption of materials can happen. Okay, so and also the longer a digestive system is, if you're looking at different animals, the more likely it is to be herbivorous or to eat plants. Okay, so you can see, in the bigger the stomach, the more likely it is to be carnivorous or to eat proteins. So you can see in humans we have both. So we are true omnivores in that we can digest proteins and we can digest non-proteins. Okay, so that's interesting. Okay. Okay, so the point of the small intestine is it does a lot of digestion and it does a lot of absorption. Okay, so let's keep moving. All right. The reason why it's not just a smooth tube, it looks like really weird sausage, is like the esophagus is a nice smooth tube because all it is just a tube of muscle that allows everything to squeeze through it. Well, the small intestine has a bunch of bumps and grinds, and it's very important because all those bumps and grinds have these little like finger-like projections, and then on each finger-like projection is another finger-like projection, because the more surface area you have, the more chances you have for stuff to be absorbed. Okay, and that's very, very important. So the more surface area, the more chances you have for something to be absorbed. If it gets missed by that first receptor, well, it can go on and be absorbed by the next one and the next one and the next one. So the more you fold something, it's like your brain. The more folded your brain is, then the more area for cells to be working. And so in the case of the brain, it's more areas for synapses to happen. In the case of the intestine, it's more places for absorption to happen. Okay. So we have these first things are called, basically they're pleats, they're called plica, and then we have on top of the plica are the villi, and then the microvilli are the ones that actually do the absorption, okay? So again, this is where this structure and function comes together in this beautiful way. The more folded something is, the more it can absorb, okay? So if it's not folded, it's not going to do much absorbing. It's like if you have an open area studio versus an apartment with lots of walls, like different rooms. The more walls, the more rooms you have, the more posters you can put up. The fewer walls, the fewer posters you can put up, okay? So in this case, the posters are absorption spots. Interesting. All right, next, the large intestines, or the colon. The colon has 3 big parts. It has the ascending, because it goes up. It has the transverse, because it goes across. And then it has the descending colon. So by now, no more food is being absorbed. Okay, all food absorption is happening in the small intestine. So you'll notice, while it does have some pleating to it, some squishiness, some folds to it, the only absorption that's happening here is water and some salts, okay? We also have a lot of bacteria that live here, which is fine because what they do is any food that hasn't been digested, the bacteria can eat, and then a lot of times they produce vitamins for us, and those vitamins can be absorbed. Okay, so, but what's really happening here is all of the water that we haven't absorbed yet is being wrung out of our food, because a lot of our water comes straight for our food. Okay, this is also why you should make sure you drink lots of water every day, because if the less water you have here, the harder your digestive system has to work to squish things out of it, and that's constipation. Okay. Okay, so there's some landmarks happening here. Okay, so the appendix hangs off. This is our appendix. Does it have a function? Maybe, and it's looking like it probably has function early in our development, like when we're babies or even fetuses, in helping us produce the kind of immune cells we need to survive later in life. But then later, it doesn't have as much function, and then if it just if like food gets trapped in there, it can suddenly become problematic, and then it can become inflamed, and you have to get your appendix removed, or you could die. Thanks, evolution. That's great. Cool. What else do I want you to know? Just know very much that as you move through this, we are absorbing water, and we have a lot of bacteria that are acting to produce, to eat extra food that we're not eating, and to produce some vitamins for us. Okay, so when you're talking about your gut flora, you're usually talking about the stuff that's happening in the intestine. And by now, we're basically making feces. That's all we're doing. By the time you get to this descending or sigmoid colon, I guess, the sigmoid colon, that's this one. Boop. The sigmoid colon, you're just straight up feces. That's all this is. And so feces is anything you can't eat, so you can't digest it for some reason. It's some water, it's some bacteria, and it's just anything that your body was like, we don't want this. Let's throw it in the digestive system and get rid of it. Okay. And then the rectum is just the holding place, and as pressure from feces is starting to hit the internal and external sphincter, that's what tells you, oh, I have to go to the bathroom now. Okay, so it's time for me to go and read a book or whatever it is you do on the toilet. Okay, and so that's what's causing you that kind of, it's kind of like a little knocking, like, hello, it's time to get out. Okay. There are some cases where if your body is really worried that you ate something really bad, like it's something you don't recognize, or if you have alcohol poisoning, it wants to get as much out of you as quickly as possible because it thinks you're going to die. And it's a lot easier to puke or have really bad diarrhea and then eat again later than to kind of sit on it and wait and see if maybe you should do something else instead. So if you are going to get rid of, if you have food poisoning lower in your digestive system, your either of your intestines, you're going to lose it through the anus. If you have food poisoning in your stomach, you're going to throw up. Okay. And a lot of times if you're doing both, it's because your system can't figure out where the thing is that's making you ill, or it's in the entire system. It's just trying to get rid of everything. Super fun. All right. So again, I found this somewhere. It was a quote that an anatomy professor said, your anal sphincter is your best friend. It can tell the difference between solid, liquid, and a gas. And that, folks, is the difference between clean underwear and dirty underwear, or clean underwear and a really bad day. Fabulous. All right, moving on. Let's talk about some accessory organs. So we already talked about the salivary glands, so the ones that produce saliva in the mouth, but let's talk about the pancreas. So we talked about the pancreas a little bit when we talked about insulin in the hormone system, in the endocrine system, sorry. So insulin and glucagon are two, is it glucagon? Anyway, the two big hormones that the pancreas is making to control how much sugar is in your bloodstream, okay? And that is actually a result of digestion, because when you digest food, like if you eat a really big meal, like a lot of times we say, oh, if you eat a really big Thanksgiving dinner, the turkey makes you sleepy. No, it's not the turkey that makes you sleepy. It's the fact that you just ate a gigantic meal and all of your blood is going to your digestive system to break it all down and move it to different parts of your body. Also, there's so much glucose in your bloodstream now that your body's like, shh, we got this, please calm down. And it makes you very sleepy. So you can, we do most of our digesting while we're sleeping, and especially our absorption. And so that's a big part there, is it's like, just go take a nap so we can deal with this so that you can run away later, okay? Okay, so in the pancreas, what's happening is the pancreas is going to be releasing these digestive enzymes, and the whole point of them is that they go into this bile duct. Okay, so you'll notice there, hey, here's the gallbladder, here's the liver. So there's something called the common bile duct, where it's the duct from the pancreas and the duct from the gallbladder and the liver all dump into the very first part of the duodenum, or the very first part of the small intestine. And the whole point is that there's a bunch of enzymes happening here, and there is a sphincter to determine when stuff gets added to the small intestine. So the enzymes coming from the pancreas help digest more carbohydrates. Okay, so more sugars. Interestingly, the pancreas, it's all about that sugar, right? So that's very interesting. That's one way to remember it. The pancreas is involved in insulin production, and it's also involved in sugar breakdown in our intestine. Okay, cool. What else? We also have oh yeah. So the reason why there's a sphincter here is because you don't want to just be constantly dumping enzymes into the intestine, because they are metabolically very expensive to make. They're like very specialized tools. Okay, so instead of just always producing these the enzymes, their stomach happens first, because acids are really easy to make. They're very small molecules. They're very easy to control. You just take a chloride and you shove some hydrogen on it, which is everywhere anyway, and it's very easy to control that. Okay, and so interestingly, the pancreas is also producing sodium bicarbonate, which is basically, it's a base. It's exactly a base, which is the opposite of an acid, or it can neutralize an acid. And so you don't want to be releasing a bunch of enzymes into a really acidic place where the enzymes are just going to get broken down before they can do any digestion. So the first thing the pancreas actually releases is that sodium bicarbonate, which is literally just baking soda, but we produce it. Okay, and what it does, the whole point of it is it denatures the acids coming from the stomach. It denatures it. It neutralizes the acids coming from the stomach. So once that is neutral, the enzymes can be released, and then they don't break down because of the acid. They can actually do the breaking down. Okay, so that's very important, and it happens because both through neural stimulation, so your brain saying, digestion's happening, get ready, let's have it. And then also there's hormones that say so, and actually the hormone is called secretin, because it was one of the first hormones found, and it was being secreted. Good job, science. That's a very creative term. Okay, and so the whole point is it gets secreted into the bloodstream to tell your body that digestion is happening. Okay. Remember that digestion only happens when you're in the rest and digest phase, so in the parasympathetic phase, but it also there are parts that go into the sympathetic phase, okay? So there's the book goes into in much more detail about when different things happen, but most of digestion is only happening when you're in your rest and digest non-stressed phase. Interesting. Okay, here's some more. Oh yeah, this goes more into the specific enzymes, so this is interesting. Okay, so amylase, remember that's what's coming from our salivary glands. It's also produced in our pancreas. Okay, so it's going to take those longer sugars, the polysaccharides, and break them down into disaccharides. Okay, there are very specific things like sucrase breaks down sucrose. Maltase breaks down maltose. Lactase, guess what it does? It breaks down lactose or milk proteins. Okay, so that's very important. We also see some proteins that are going to break down your lipids, like lipase, trypsin, chymotrypsin, and carboxypeptidase. Ugh. That is going to also break down some proteins, okay? So the pancreas is making all these enzymes to break down so much stuff. This is fantastic. Good job, pancreas. Good job. And so this is a good thing to just kind of write down so you remember which one does what. A lot of times scientists, want to make sure that it's labeled for what it does, okay? So sucrase is the enzyme for sucrose, which is the sugar, okay? Lactase is the enzyme that breaks down lactose. So this is important. Spelling is very important in this part of science. Most parts of science. Again, nuclease is going to break down your nucleic acids. Oh, interesting. Pepsidase is going to break down peptides, which are small proteins. Again, the pancreas is also making sodium bicarbonate, which neutralizes that acid from the stomach. All right, let's talk about the liver. So the last time we talked about the liver, we were talking about how when you're you have low blood sugar, you release a hormone called glucagon, and it goes to your liver and it says, "Hey, we're starving. Please start breaking down sugars in the body so that I don't have to go eat food." Okay, so if you can't find food, if you're in a starving state, you start to break down carbohydrates because your liver gets a hormone signal to start to release the sugars that it's holding in. But it does a lot more than that. It's actually much more complicated than just a place to store sugar, right? So it also produces bile, which bile is all about digesting fats, okay? So again, glycogen is that storage molecule for glucose. It's broken down by glucagon in gluconeogenesis. Okay, it produces, it does all these other things we're not really worried about for this thing. One very important thing is it detoxifies poisons. So again, if the apocalypse happens and you're ever trapped in the woods and you're trying to survive, the one thing you shouldn't eat in an animal is its liver. So some people say, no, of course you should eat liver. That also makes a lot of micronutrients. Well, but the problem is they're micronutrients for a reason. If you eat too many of them, you could die. So there's been a lot of, there was a very famous exploration team from, I think, Sweden that was exploring the North Pole, and they may have died because their hot air balloon that they were using, because that's when this was happening, crashed, and they decided to eat a polar bear, and they ate its liver, and they got vitamin A poisoning. So you can die by having too much vitamin, so that's not good. So again, but it also stores it stores poisons before it can detoxify it. So again, just don't eat liver unless you know exactly where it's coming from. Like cows are fine because we definitely control what cows are eating, but any other animal, very bad. Don't eat their liver. Okay, so the point of it, of the liver and the bile part of it, so bile is going to go in and break down those proteins. It emulsifies it, and yeah, okay, that's what, oh yeah, so here are some examples of things that get broken down by bile, okay, and so yeah, so bilirubin is, it's one of the things that bile comes from, and you can actually build that up in your, we've talked a little bit about, there's a skin disorder where you build up bilirubin, or it's called jaundice, when you build up bilirubin in your skin and you start to look a bit yellow, and that tells you you're going probably through a major stage of cirrhosis and your liver is breaking down. Okay, so that's problematic. If you're breaking down cholesterol, that's again happening through bile. Same thing with steroid hormones. Calcium is absorbed here in antibiotics, and a lot of the parts of our drugs are broken down in the liver into the parts that we need to actually use. Excellent. All right, but So the liver is constantly making bile, constantly bile, always happening. But it doesn't want to just be throwing that bile into the intestine before it's needed. So it stores that bile in the gallbladder. So that's basically all the gallbladder does, is it just sits there with that bile, which is, some bile salts, some cholesterol, some bilirubin, all these things. And it just sits there and waits until the signal says, okay, release it. And it goes into the duodenum. Now, here's the problem. If you have too much bile and not enough water, I don't really care about that. Let's go to, don't really worry about that. Oh, man, where's my lovely picture of this? Bleh. Oh, it's skipped. Okay, got it. So if you have too much bile, if you have too much fat and you're really starting to have to produce a whole lot of bile and your liver can't really catch up, you make gallstones, okay? So this is for people they tend to be people who only eat fast food, and they're only eating like the greasiest fast food possible. No judgment, but do be aware that you could build up gallstones and they're very, very painful. And so drink much more water, okay? So, okay. All right. So that's all I want you to know about the gallbladder. So the gallbladder is what stores the bile before it is dumped into the intestine. And that's it for digestion, because I don't really need you to know about the portal system here. Yeah. So, all right. So we've done plenty, I think, already in this lecture. We've learned about the system as a whole. Okay. So from mouth to anus, we've learned about the accessory organs, the liver, the gallbladder, the pancreas, and the salivary glands, and what each part's doing and what each part is secreting. So definitely look into, make sure you know what secretes what and what is absorbed where, and you'll be good to go for digestion. All right. Goodbye.